Print, email, Facebook, Twitter. More. NSW Family and Community Services mission to house the homeless with a single van. A single van deployed by the Department of Family and Community Services is hitting the streets and trying to get as many rough sleepers into permanent accommodation as possible. Paul Vivas, the department's Deputy Secretary of the Southern and Western Cluster, said they had managed to house 220 people in permanent accommodation. But the really amazing thing is 90% of them are still there, he said. Mr. Vivas said the change in tactics came in part after the Martin Place tent city during 2017. More than 70 rough sleepers set up camp in Sydney's Martin Place, demanding better housing and support services for the vulnerable. Mr. Vivas said that movement prompted the department to listen and implement change. One change was to deploy a van taking department workers out of the office and onto the streets. Workers set up in locations such as outside the Newtown neighborhood center and talked to passers-by, with computers on hand should they ask to be signed up to housing services. They also regularly head out onto the streets, walking around to see if there is anyone in need. Mr. Vivas said laptops enabled officers to easily check if a person has already registered for housing, and if they had, to determine why they had not received it yet. But in many cases they're not registered, and so we get their details onto the computer, and that's really the start of the process of us getting them housed, he said. He said such change had made a world of difference. We learned so much from working with rough sleepers at the Martin Place tent city, Mr. Vivas said. We managed to house over 100 people directly into permanent accommodation from Martin Place, and we've just carried on. According to the 2016 census, New South Wales saw a 27% increase in homelessness, with a significant portion of that attributed to overcrowding. I don't want to end up sleeping rough again. Sarai has slept rough in the past and is trying hard to ensure she does not end up there again. She visited the van during its Newtown stop to see about getting housing. The gender center put me into crisis accommodation, and then after that 3 months, I was moved to transitional housing. But now that time's up and I have to fend for myself, she said. Desiree said her time sleeping rough was tough. I was sleeping under a bridge for 2 weeks, she said. It's not nice at the best of times, but then when you're a transgender it's even harder. Desiree said she was hopeful she would get put back into housing. If I can get the reinstatement back onto housing and find housing accommodation so it's affordable to live, that would be great, she said. Enormous rise in Newtown numbers. Elaine McNish, from the Newtown Neighborhood Center, organizes services like the Department of Family and Community Services van to visit and help locals. She said over the past few years the demand in Newtown for such services had risen enormously. In the February street counts, this year there was 28 people, last year there was 2, she said. Ms. McNish said housing affordability was one factor behind the spike, but she wondered if there was more to it. It is possible that, with the numbers shrinking in the city, that could have an impact, and neighboring suburbs such as Newtown are maybe taking on a few more rough sleepers, she said. NSW Minister for Family and Community Services and Social Housing Prudence Goward said homelessness, and in particular rough sleeping, was a complex issue. She said there had been a 43% increase in the government's homelessness budget over the past 4 years, with $1.1 billion dedicated to be spent on public and community housing. But Ms. Goward conceded there was much more to be done right across the state. You can't just say to somebody once, "Mate, would you like to go somewhere for the night?" she said. You've got to keep building that relationship before many of them will even want to discuss their life with you, let alone agree to trust you when you say I can offer you housing. Print, email, Facebook.